Hey guys, tonight we creep into the smoky shadows of a medieval healer's den, where the air reeks of bitter herbs and the faint iron tang of blood, lingering on a stained wooden table. Picture yourself brushing past bundles of dried nettles, hanging from the rafters, the flicker of a single rushlight casting eerie shapes on mud-plastered walls. You're here to uncover why medieval medicine was often worse than the disease. A grim dance of leeches, knives, and potions that left patients sicker or dead in the 12th to 15th centuries. Trust me, you probably wouldn't survive a single cure from these so-called physicians, let alone the stench of their remedies. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in this dimly lit den, the floor gritty with ash, and the first thing that hits you is the desperation of the air medieval Europe, a world of plague, war, and mystery, where illness was a death sentence and healers were as feared as the diseases they fought. You're a patient, let's call you Edrica village blacksmith with a nagging fever, seeking relief from the local healer, a grizzled man muttering over a bubbling pot. Medicine here isn't science. It's a mix of guesswork, superstition, and tradition, often doing more harm than good. A far cry from the Victorian laudanum traps we explored or the wedding night fears we shuddered through. You're here to peel back the layers of this deadly practice, starting with the world that shaped it, a cauldron of hope and horror. Let's ground this with a mainstream fact. Medieval medicine was based on the ancient theory of humoral balance, widely accepted from the 5th to 15th centuries. As noted in medical texts like Avicenna's Canon of Medicine 11th century, healers believed your body held for humor's blood, phlegm, yellow bile. Black bile and illness meant they were out of whack, requiring drastic fixes like bleeding or purging to restore health. You're wincing as the healer eyes your arm, his knife glinting, ready to balance your fever, and you're uneasy. The dense clutter jars of leeches, bowls of herbs, a sign of cures that sound worse than your chills. The manor's feudal chains we felt in another tale, a distant kin to this bodily control, where your health's at his mercy. Now, here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers used urine wheels, charts matching peas color to diseases, a diagnostic tool as common as a blacksmith's hammer. In the 13th century, manuscripts show these wheels, with hues from cloudy amber to greenish murk, signaling anything from fever to demons. You're imagining the healer holding up a vial of your urine, squinting at it like a fortune teller, and grinning. It's like a medieval webd, but with worse outcomes than a Google scare. You're half tempted to laugh, but his serious nod and the knife's edge keep you still. The rushlights flicker, a reminder of the ignorance driving these cures, like the Lord's tokens branding serfs we saw. But not everyone agrees on why medieval medicine was so deadly. Historians still argue whether its failures stem from a lack of scientific knowledge or a cultural reliance on tradition and faith, with no clear cause in medical treatises or chronicles. Some, citing limited anatomy studies, say healers worked with what they knew, constrained by primitive tools. Others, pointing to superstition, argue blind adherence to ancient texts and religion's stifled progress, like the church's grip we'll see later. You're clutching your cloak, the healer's muttering growing louder, and wondering if he's clueless or just stuck in old ways. The stable's lash, and the undercroft's hunger we've faced in another life. Now a fever you fear he'll worsen. The wedding night's myths we debunked, a faint echo of this medical haze. your body a gamble in his hands. Step closer to the table and notice the details. The sticky resin of herbs under your fingers. The faint buzz of a fly. The way the rushlight's glow dances on the knife's blade. A threat in the dim distance. A stage, like the manor's hall we served in. But it's a chamber of dread, where every cure risks your life. The feudal laws of lords, now a healer's unchecked power. You're feeling the tension, a patient caught between hope and horror. Your fever a plea for help, but the remedy's bleeding, purging feeling like punishment. The village's scorn, we walked through a shadow compared to this peril. You're thinking of that urine wheel, a frail hope against sickness, and how it ties to a world that trusts knives over knowledge, like the laudanum vials that numbed other pains we met. Time for a quick joke. Why was the urine wheel so colorful? Because it painted Edric's doom in style. You're smirking, but it's quiet, the healer's cough stifles it, his eyes narrowing. You're catching a glimpse of a leech jar, its contents wriggling, and sensing the stakes. Medicine here isn't healing, it's a roll of the dice, where the cure could kill faster than the fever. The wedding night's dread, we felt a softer fear than this knife's edge. You're wondering about the patient who sat here before, if they walked out or were carried, their story lost in the din's murk. The fear's not just of pain, it's of trust misplaced. A life where you're less than the herbs he grinds, as you brace for the healer's touch. His knife gleaming, you're craving escape. The din's smoke a trap, your role as Edrica. Fevered plea in a world of deadly cures. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just one healer, it's a society where medicine was a gamble that often lost. Its failure's a brutal truth beneath the era's faith and fear. You're thinking of those urine wheels, spinning lies like feudal lords spun power, and how they reflect a world that harmed more than it healed. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll survive this cure or fade. And the thousands who've lain here before, their lives lost in the smoke. The rushlight dims, the knife nears, and you're carrying this deadly truth, ready to explore the humoral theory that misguided it, a science as murky as the din's haze. One last chuckle. Why was the healer so confident? Because he trusted leeches more than Edric. You're tensing on the table, the cloak slipping, as the din's gloom closes in. With medieval medicine's dangers heavy in your heart, you're ready to dive into the humoral theory that fueled its failures, a belief that doomed the sick. You're still hunched on that creaky table in the medieval healer's den, the air thick with the acrid scent of crushed herbs and the lingering whiff of singed wool. From a cauldron bubbling nearby, the rushlight's flicker dances on the healer's face, his brow furrowed as he mutters about excess blood causing your fever, his grimy fingers tracing a chart of swirling lines. You're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century, your cloak damp with sweat, the knife from last time's threat now joined by a bowl of writhing leeches. The manor's feudal chains and the village's scorn feel distant, but your body's fate hangs here, where medicine's ignorance could kill you faster than the illness. You're here to explore the humoral theory that misguided medieval medicine, the flawed science that made treatments worse than the disease, a belief as shaky as the table beneath you. This is the fog of false knowledge, and you're feeling its weight. Heavy as the healer's looming shadow, sharp as the leech's bite. The mainstream fact is that humoral theory, derived from ancient Greek and Roman medicine, dominated medieval health care from the 5th to 15th centuries. As detailed in texts like Galen's on the natural faculties 2nd century, widely used in Europe, it held that your body's health depended on balancing for humor's blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, each tied to elements, seasons, and temperaments, with imbalance causing disease. You're wincing as the healer declares your fever A surfeit of blood, prescribing a bleed to cool you, and you're skeptical. The dens clutter herbs, leeches, charts a maze of dogma. The stable's lash we endured in another tale a blunt pain compared to this calculated harm. The humoral theory a chain as tight as feudal laws we plowed through. But here's a quirky tidbit. Healers used zodiac charts to time treatments, believing stars influenced humors, so your bleeding might wait for Virgo's alignment. In the 13th century, medical manuscripts featured these star maps, guiding when to cut or purge. You're picturing the healer squinting at a parchment of constellations, delaying your leeching until the moon's right, and grinning it's like a medieval horoscope, loopier than those urine wheels we chuckled at last time. You're half tempted to ask if Mars will cure you faster, but his solemn nod and the leech bowl squirm keep you quiet. The theory's grip as firm as the Lord's token we wore. A false science no star can fix. Historians still argue whether humoral theory persisted due to intellectual stagnation or its ability to explain symptoms. In a pre-scientific world, with no clear reason in medical treatises or university records, some, citing its ancient roots, say it was clung to for lack of better ideas. Others, noting its flexibility, argue it offered a framework that fit any ailment, delaying progress like the church's sanction we'll see. You're gripping the table, the healer's knife hovering, and wondering if he's stuck in old books or just sees your fever as hot bile, the field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we face now a fever he's misreading. The wedding night's myths we debunked a faint echo of this flawed logic. Your life a gamble on his chart. Time for a quick joke. Why was the zodiac chart so starry? Because it twinkled past Edric's pain. You're chuckling, but it's hushed the healer's grunt drowns it. And you're wary of his sharpening blade. You're shifting, the table creaking. As you take in the scene, picture the scene. The den's a claustrophobic lair, with shelves of cracked jars, a mortar grinding something foul, and the humoral chart's ink lines sprawling like a map to nowhere. You're not in the manor's muddy fields or the chapel's solemn pews. You're in a chamber of delusion, where humoral theory rules. The healer's muttering blood's hot and wet. Your fever's sanguine excess sounds like poetry, but it's deadly, prescribing cuts or purges to balance what's already breaking you. The violence we faced in the stable a blunt force compared to this precision harm. The feudal system's yoke we felt now a medical dogma, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The theory's not just wrong, it's a trap, turning your body into a battlefield. The laudanum-like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this dread. Though you sit on Edric's grit your core. Step closer to the chart and notice the details. The brittle parchment under your gaze, the faint slosh of leeches, the way the rushlight's flame sways like your trust, fragile under his knife. This den's a crucible, like those task chants we hummed for serfs, but it's treacherous. A place where your health's a theory, not a truth. You're thinking of that urine wheel, how it spun lies, and how humoral theory humors, stars, balances mirrors the legal bonds we plowed through, each cut a chain to a false cure. You're wondering why your fever's a cosmic flaw, why the healer trusts Galen over your pain. The myths of divine lords we heard a cruel kin to this. Science, strong but wrong. You're craving clarity, but the chart swirls and the leeches wriggle are your reality. The system a fog, like the Victorian healer's errors we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the humor so moody? Because it blamed Edric's blood for everything. You're smiling, but it's grim. The healer's hand on your arm pulls you back, his confidence a warning. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame they've led here, where humoral theory's the patient's sentence, not just a cure but a life risked, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those cruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other patients' peasants, knights their fevers like yours, each cut a shared wound, their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife, now sharpened by this flawed science. As you brace for the leech's bite, the healer's chart rustling, you're aching for a cure that helps. The dens smoke a trap, the humoral theory a weight you can't shed, like the tokens chafing. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just a theory, it's a disaster, making medicine worse than the disease by misguiding every cut, driven by tradition and error. You're thinking of those zodiac charts, aligning stars with pain, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that trusted dogma over truth. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this cure or fade, and the thousands who've sat here before, their lives lost in the leeches. The rushlight dims, the knife glints, and you're carrying this misguided science, ready to face the brutal practice of bloodletting, a treatment as deadly as the fever itself. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the leech so eager? Because it loved Edric's blood more. You're tensing on the table, the leech nearing, as the den's haze thickens, with humoral theory's failures heavy in your heart. You're ready to witness bloodletting's brutal practice, a cure that bled the sick dry. You're still perched on that rickety table in the medieval healer's den, the air stinging with the sharp tang of vinegar from a bowl, and the musty reek of damp rushes underfoot. The rushlight's glow wavers, glinting off a razor-sharp lancet in the healer's hand, its blade poised above your vein as he mumbles about releasing hot blood to cure your fever. You're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century, your pulse racing under the sweaty folds of your cloak. The leeches from last time's humoral theory now joined by this gleaming threat. The manor's chains and the village's scorn aura. Distant hum, but the den's danger is immediate, where a cure could drain you dry. You're here to witness the brutal practice of bloodletting, the medieval obsession that often made diseases deadlier, a treatment as savage as the lash we felt in other tales. This is the cut of false healing, and you're feeling its edge, sharp as the lancet's bite, heavy as the blood pooling in your mind's eye. The mainstream fact is that bloodletting was a cornerstone of medieval medicine, practiced widely from the 5th to 15th centuries, based on humoral theory's belief that removing blood restored bodily balance, as detailed in medical texts like the Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanae 12th century. Healers bled patients for fevers, headaches, even melancholy, using lancets, leeches, or cups, often taking pints at a time, weakening or killing the sick. You're flinching as the healer ties a strip of cloth around your arm, his blade nicking your skin, and you're dizzy. The den's haze herbs, smoke, fear closing in. The humoral theory's dogma we unraveled last time now a literal wound. The stable's violence we faced a blunt pain compared to this calculated harm, as lethal as the Victorian quack cures we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers used bleeding bowls, etched with volume marks to measure blood, like a gruesome measuring cup, ensuring they took just enough to balance you. In the 13th century, archaeological finds show these bowls, often decorated with crosses for luck. You're picturing one beside you, its marks gleaming red, and grinning. It's like a medieval smoothie blender, gorier than those zodiac charts we scoffed at last time. You're half tempted to knock it over, sparing your veins. But the healer's steady grip and the lancet's sting keep you frozen. The bloodletting's brutality as relentless as the Lord's token we wore. A cure that's no cure at all. Historians still argue whether bloodletting's popularity stemmed from blind faith in humoral theory or its dramatic, visible results, with no clear reason in medical manuscripts or patient accounts. Some, citing its ancient roots, say it was trusted because it worked by placebo or shock. Others, noting frequent deaths, argue it persisted due to tradition's grip, stifling better methods. Like the church's hold we'll see. You're clutching the table, blood trickling into the bowl, and wondering if the healer believes this helps or just follows old rules. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we faced now a fever this bleeding worsens. The wedding night's dread we felt a softer fear than this draining. Your life spilling with each drop. Time for a quick joke. Why was the bleeding bowl so greedy? Because it thirsted for Edric's strength. You're chuckling, but it's weak the healer's hum drowns it, and you're wary of his tightening cloth. You're slumping, the din's heat fading, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The din's a grim workshop, with jars of murky sobs, a pestle grinding, and the bleeding bowl's red tide rising. A far cry from the chapel's pews or the manor's fields. You're not in the stable's brutal muck or the undercroft's vault. You're in a slaughterhouse of healing, where bloodletting rules. The healer's slicing, draining pints for your hot fever, he says, claiming it'll purge your ill humors, but you're lightheaded. The humoral theory's lies we explored, turning your blood into a sacrifice. The feudal system's yoke now a medical ritual, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The practice isn't just wrong, it's a death sentence, weakening you when you need strength. The laudanum-like herbs will meet tempting as a blur for this faintness. Though you cling to the table, Edric's grit your anchor. Step closer to the bowl and notice the details. The warm blood's coppery scent, the faint clink of the lancet on the table, the way your vision blurs, a sign of your fading strength. This din's a torture chamber, like those task chants we hummed for serfs, but it's clinical, a place where your body's bled for dogma's sake. You're thinking of that urine wheel, how it spun lies, and how bloodletting cutting veins. Sucking leeches mirrors the legal bonds we plowed through, each drop a chain to a false cure. You're wondering why your blood's the answer, why the healer trusts knives over rest. The myths of divine lords we heard a cruel kin to this ritual, strong but deadly. You're craving relief, but the bowl's filling, the system a trap, like the Victorian healer's errors we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the leech so clingy? Because it loved Edric's veins more than he did. You're smiling, but it's faint the healer's cloth loosening pulls you back. His satisfaction a warning. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame. The loft's spark they've led here, where bloodlettings, the patient's doom, not just a cure but a life drained, like the wedding night surrender we faced. You're remembering those cruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they aligned with the rebel marks we carved, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other patients' peasants, nobles their veins like yours, each cut a shared wound. Their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife. Now deepened by this brutal bleed, as you slump further, the healer's blade retreating. You're gasping for strength, the din's smoke. A haze, the bloodletting's toll a weight you can't shed, like the fever's fire. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just a treatment, it's a catastrophe, making medicine worse than the disease by draining life. driven by error and tradition. You're thinking of those bleeding bowls, measuring death, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that bled its sick for balance's sake. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this bleed or fade, and the thousands who've bled here before, their lives lost in the bowl. The rushlight dims, the den blurs, and you're carrying this deadly practice, ready to uncover the toxic herbal cures that followed, a poison as cruel as the lancet's cut. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was bloodletting so popular? Because it loved Edric's blood more than he did. You're swaying on the table, the bowl brimming, as the den's gloom thickens, with bloodletting's brutality heavy in your heart. You're ready to explore the herbal cures that poison the sick, a remedy as deadly as the disease. You're slumped on that blood-stained table in the medieval healer's den, the air now sour with the bitter stench of boiled roots, and the lingering coppery tang of your own blood, still seeping from the lancet's cut. The rushlights dim, glow flickers, casting warped shadows on a shelf of clay pots, each brimming with murky concoctions the healer's stirring with a stained spoon. You're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century, your cloak clammy as your fever spikes, the bloodletting's dizziness from last time mixing with a new dread, as the healer offers a steaming cup of healing brew. The manor's chains and the village's scorn are a faint hum, but this den's potions could be your doom, where medicine's cures rival the disease's wrath. You're here to uncover the toxic herbal remedies that worsen medieval ailments, brews that poisoned, as often as they soothed, a danger as grim as the stable's lash we've felt in other tales. This is the venom of false cures, and you're feeling its threat, sharp as the brew's acrid burn, heavy as the cup trembling in your hands. The mainstream fact is that medieval medicine heavily relied on herbal remedies, prescribed for nearly every ailment from fevers to plagues, but many were toxic or ineffective, as documented in herbals like the herbarium of Apelais circa 11th century. Used in the 13th century, plants like hemlock, nightshade, or foxglove, mixed with roots and barks, were common, often misdosed due to poor knowledge of pharmacology, causing vomiting, seizures, or death. You're gagging as the healer urges you to drink the brews, greenish sludge smelling of rot, and you're wary, knowing it's meant to purge your bile but might kill you faster than the fever. The bloodletting's drain we endured, now a prelude to this poison. The humoral theory's dogma we unraveled, a recipe for disaster, as lethal as the Victorian laudanum traps we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers used charm herbs, plants like mandrake or vervain, tied in pouches and worn to ward off disease, believed to hold magical powers. In the 13th century, apothecary records note these amulets, often sold with potions for double effect. You're eyeing a small sack dangling from the healer's belt, its lumpy shape promising luck, and grinning it's like a medieval essential. Oil diffuser, fancier than those bleeding bowls we winced at last time. You're half tempted to grab it, hoping it's safer than the brew, but the healer's insistent shove of the cup and the potion's stench keep you focused. The herbal cure's danger as real as the Lord's token we wore, a remedy that's more curse than cure. Historians still argue whether herbal remedies were a sincere attempt to heal or a reckless reliance on tradition, with no clear intent in medical texts or healer accounts. Some, citing extensive herbals, say they were based on trial and error, offering some relief. Others, noting frequent poisonings, argue ignorance and superstition made them deadly, like the church's grip we'll see later. You're staring into the cup, its surface oily, and wondering if the healer trusts this brew or just follows old recipes. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we face now a fever this potion might worsen. The wedding night's myths we debunked a faint echo of this toxic folly. Your life a wager on his herbs. Time for a quick joke. Why was the herbal brew so bitter? Because it hated Edric's guts more than the fever. You're chuckling, but it's weak the healer's scowl drowns it, and you're wary of his looming spoon. You're gripping the cup, the den's haze swirling, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The den's a witch's lair, with pots of simmering sludge, bundles of wilting leaves, and a mortar crusted with green paste. A far cry from the chapel's pews or the manor's fields. You're not in the stable's brutal muck or the undercroft's vault. You're in a poisoner's workshop, where herbal cures reign, the healer's stirring nightshade for cooling, hemlock for calming, claiming it'll balance your humors, but you're queasy. The humoral theories lies we explored turning your fever into a gamble. The feudal system's yoke now a medical brew, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The herbs aren't just wrong, they're deadly, sickening you when you need healing. The laudanum-like herbs will meet a cruel irony as this brew threatens worse. Though you sip, Edric's grit your core, step closer to the cauldron and notice the details. The scalding, steam on your face, the faint pop of boiling roots, the way the brew's fumes sting your eyes. A sign of its venom. This den's a death trap, like those task chants we hummed for serfs. But it's alchemical, a place where your body's poisoned for dogma's sake. You're thinking of that zodiac chart, how it spun lies, and how these herbs mandrake, foxglove mirror. The bloodletting we faced, each sip a chain to a false cure. You're wondering why your fever needs poison, why the healer trusts weeds over water. The myths of divine lords we heard a cruel kin to this alchemy, strong but toxic. You're craving relief, but the cup's emptying, the system a haze. Like the Victorian healer's poisons we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the potion so green? Because it envied Edric's fading life. You're smiling, but it's grim the healer's nod pulls you back. His faith in the brew a warning. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame. The loft's spark they've led here, where herbal cures are the patient's doom. Not just a remedy, but a life risked. Like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those gruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved. Small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other patients' peasants, nobles their fevers like yours, each sip a shared wound, their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife. Now worsened by this toxic brew, as you choke down the last sip, the healer's eyes gleaming. You're gasping for air, the den's smoke. A trap. The herbal cures burn a weight you can't shed, like the blood's loss. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just a potion, it's a catastrophe, making medicine worse than the disease by poisoning the sick, driven by error and superstition. You're thinking of those charm herbs, promising luck, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that brewed death for healing's sake. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this poison or fade. And the thousands who've sipped here before, their lives lost in the pots. The rushlight dims, the den spins, and you're carrying this toxic truth. Ready to probe the grisly risks of medieval surgery, a horror as deadly as the brew's sting. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the herb so mean? Because it loved Edric's pain more. You're swaying on the table, the cup empty, as the den's haze thickens, with toxic herbal cures heavy in your heart. You're ready to face the horrors of medieval surgery, a practice that carved the sick apart. You're sprawled on the blood-stained table in the medieval healer's den, the air now rancid with the stench of rancid fat from a tallow candle, and the bitter aftertaste of that toxic herbal brew still burning your throat. The rushlights, gone out, replaced by a smoky torch that casts jagged shadows on a tray of rusty tools, knives, saws, and a grim iron hook. You're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century, your fever spiking as sweat soaks your cloak. The bloodlettings drain, and the potion's nausea from last time now joined by a new terror. The healer's muttering about cutting out the corruption in your leg, swollen from a forge burn. The manor's chains and the village's scorn are a faint echo, but this den's blades could end you. Where medicine's cures are a butcher's art. You're here to probe the grisly risks of medieval surgery, a practice so brutal it often killed faster than the disease, a horror as raw as the feudal lash we felt in other tales. This is the slice of false healing, and you're feeling its threat, sharp as the saw's teeth, heavy as the dread knotting your gut. The mainstream fact is that medieval surgery was rare but extraordinarily dangerous, performed without anesthesia or proper hygiene from the 5th to 15th centuries. As documented in surgical texts like Roger Frugard's Chirurgia circa 1180, surgeons, often barbers or monks, cut for wounds, tumors, or infections, using unsterilized tools and crude methods, with infection or blood loss killing most patients. You're gripping the table as the healer, no surgeon but eager, sharpens a blade, claiming to lance your leg's foul humor. And you're terrified. The den's clutter tools, herbs, blood, a slaughterhouse, the herbal brews, poison we sipped now a prelude to this carving, the humoral theory's dogma a death warrant, as deadly as the Victorian quack tonics we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some surgeons used wound charms, small metal amulets etched with prayers, placed on cuts to bless the surgery, believed to ward off evil spirits. In the 13th century, archaeological finds show these, often shaped like crosses. You're eyeing one dangling from the healer's neck, its glint mocking, and grinning it's like a medieval lucky rabbit's foot, flashier than those charm herbs we scoffed at last time. You're half tempted to snatch it, hoping it'll save your leg. But the healer's grip on the hook and the blade's gleam keep you still. The surgery's risk is real as the bleeding bowls we winced at, a cut no charm can mend. Historians still argue whether medieval surgery was a desperate last resort or a reckless overreach by untrained healers, with no clear motive in medical manuscripts or patient records. Some, citing surgical texts, say it was an attempt to save lives when herbs failed. Others, noting high mortality, argue it was driven by hubris or profit, harming more than helping. Like the church's grip we'll see. You're staring at the saw, your leg throbbing, and wondering if the healer's cutting to heal or to play God. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we faced now a fever this surgery could kill. The wedding, night's dread we felt a softer fear than this blade's edge. Your life a wager on his steel. Time for a quick joke. Why was the surgical hook so shiny? Because it loved carving Edric's hopes. You're chuckling, but it's weak the healer's grunt drowns it. And you're wary of his sharpening stone. You're tensing, the tables wood splintering. As you take in the scene, picture the scene. The den's a butcher's shop, with a tray of rusted blades, a bucket of bloody rags, and the torch's smoke curling like a shroud. A far cry from the chapel's pews or the manor's fields. You're not in the stable's muck or the undercroft's vault. You're in a charnel house, where surgery's a gamble. The healer's prepping knife for slicing, saw for bone, hook for probing, claiming it'll drain your legs. poison, but you're queasy. The humoral theories lies we explored, turning your burn into a death trap. The feudal systems yoke, now a surgical ritual, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The surgery's not just risky, it's a slaughter with no cleanliness or pain relief. The laudanum-like herbs will meet a cruel hope as this blade promises infection. Though you brace, Edrix, grit your core, step closer to the tray and notice the details. The cold iron of a blade under your gaze, the faint clatter of tools, the way your legs pulse hammers, a sign of its fight. This den's a torture chamber, like those task chants we hummed for serfs, but it's surgical, a place where your body's carved for dogma's sake. You're thinking of that bleeding bowl, how it drained you, and how surgery cutting flesh, sawing bone mirrors the herbal bruise poison we sipped, each slice a chain to a false cure. You're wondering why your burn needs a knife, why the healer trusts steel over time. The myths of divine lords we heard are cruel kin to this butchery, strong but deadly. You're craving mercy, but the blade's descending, the system, a trap, like the Victorian healer's poisons we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the sauce so eager? Because it craved Edric's leg more than the fever. You're smiling, but it's grim. The healer's hand on your thigh pulls you back, his focus a warning. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame, the loft's spark, the bloodletting's drain they've led here, where surgery's the patient's doom, not just a cure but a life slashed, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those gruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they aligned with the rebel marks we carved, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other patients' peasants, knights their flesh like yours, each cut a shared wound, their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife, now deepened by this grisly hack. As you grit your teeth, the healer's blade biting, you're screaming inside, the dense smoke a haze, the surgery's pain a weight you can't shed, like the fever's fire. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just a cut, it's a massacre, making medicine worse than the disease by butchering the sick, driven by error and arrogance. You're thinking of those wound charms, promising luck, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that carved its sick for balance's sake. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this blade or fade, and the thousands who've bled here before, their lives lost in the rags. The torch dims, the den spins, and you're carrying this grisly truth, ready to navigate the failed fixes for the plague, a despair as deadly as the saw's teeth. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was surgery so brutal? Because it loved Edric's screams more. You're writhing on the table, the blade sinking, as the den's gloom thickens. With surgery's horrors heavy in your heart, you're ready to face the plague's failed fixes, cures that doomed the dying. You're staggering out of the healer's den, the air outside sharp with the chill of a 13th century night, mingling with the rancid aftertaste of that toxic herbal brew, and the searing pain of a fresh surgical wound on your leg, now bandaged but oozing. The village's dirt path crunches under your boots, and you're Edric, a blacksmith, your fever raging as you lean against a Waterland daub wall, the torchlit glow of the den fading behind you, the bloodlettings drain, the poisonous potion, and the surgery's butchery from the last visits have left you weaker. But a new dread grips you. Rumors of the Black Death sweeping nearby, a plague that kills in days. The manor's chains and the chapel's shame are distant, but this village teeters on panic, where medicine's fixes are as deadly as the pestilence. You're here to navigate the failed fixes for the Black Death, the useless and often lethal cures that worsened medieval Europe's deadliest plague. A despair as grim as the feudal lash we've felt in other tales. This is the plague's dark tide, and you're feeling its pull. Heavy as the fever's fire, sharp as the fear in the villagers' eyes. The mainstream fact is that the Black Death, ravaging Europe from 1347 to 1351, killed up to 50% of the population. And medieval medicine, rooted in humoral theory, offered no effective treatments, as documented in chronicles like Boccaccio's Decameron 1353. Healers tried bloodletting, purging, and herbal concoctions to balance humors, but these weakened patients, hastening death. While miasma theory blaming bad air led to useless rituals like burning incense. You're clutching your wound, a villager's cough nearby spiking your panic. And you're desperate, knowing the healer's cures leeches, bruise. Cuts we endured are no match for the plague's black boils. The surgery's horror we faced, a prelude to this futility. The humoral theory's dogma a death sentence, as hopeless as the Victorian quacktonics we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers prescribed plague posies, pouches of rose petals and cloves worn to purify the air, believed to shield you from miasma. In the 14th century, apothecary records list these, sold like charms to desperate villagers. You're eyeing a peddler waving one, its scent faint, and grinning it's like a medieval air freshener, flimsier than those wound charms we saw during surgery. You're half tempted to buy it, hoping for a miracle, but the cuffs echo, and your wounds throb keep you grounded. The plague's fixes as futile as the bleeding bowls we winced at. A hope no posy can save. Historians still argue whether these failed fixes were driven by sheer ignorance or a desperate attempt to act in a crisis, with no clear motive in medical texts or survivor accounts. Some, citing healers' efforts, say they were frantic responses to an unknown disease. Others, noting their harm, argue blind adherence to tradition worsened the toll. Like the church's grip we'll see, you're limping past a shuttered hut, a plague victim's groan inside chilling you, and wondering if the healer's trying to save you or just clinging to old ways. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we faced now a fever this plague could end. The wedding night's dread we felt a softer fear than this creeping death. Your life a wager on his rituals. Time for a quick joke. Why was the plague posy so fragrant? Because it masked Edric's doom with roses. You're chuckling, but its wicked dog's bark drowns it. And you're wary of a passing monk's stare. You're leaning harder on the wall, the path's mud slick, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The village is a ghostly maze, with shuttered homes, a pyre's smoke rising, and villagers clutching crosses, their faces gaunt under hoods. A far cry from the Dun's grim lair, or the manor's fields. You're not in the stable's muck, or the chapel's pews. You're in a plague-ravaged world, where failed fixes rule. Healers burn sage to cleanse air, bleed victims to purge pestilence, or dose them with hemlock brews we sipped, claiming to cool the plague's heat. But bodies pile up. The humoral theories lies we explored, turning the sick into corpses. The feudal systems yoked now a medical ritual, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The fixes aren't just useless, they're killers, hastening death when rest might save. The laudanum-like herbs will meet a cruel hope as this plague consumes, though you stagger on. Edric's grit your core, step closer to the hut and notice the details. The cold wall, under your palm, the faint wail of mourners, the way your wound's bandage sticks, a sign of its rot. This village is a graveyard, like those task chants we hummed for serfs. But it's apocalyptic, a place where your life's burned for dogma's sake. You're thinking of that herbal brew, how it poisoned you, and how plague cures incense. Leeches, purges mirror the surgery's butchery we faced, each ritual a chain to a false hope. You're wondering why the plague needs more blood, why healers trust smoke over sense. The myths of divine lords we heard are cruel kin to this. Madness, strong but deadly. You're craving survival, but the pyre's glow and the plague's cough are your reality. The system a death trap, like the Victorian healer's poisons we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the incense so smoky? Because it loved Edric's death more than his life. You're smiling, but it's grim. The monk's prayer pulls you back, his faith a warning. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame, the loft's spark, the bloodletting's drain, the bruise. Poison they've led here, where plague fixes are the patient's doom. Not just a cure, but a life snuffed, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those cruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they align with the rubble marks we carved, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other victims, peasants, nobles, their boils like yours, each cure a shared wound, their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife. Now buried by this plague's despair as you limp toward the village edge. The pyre's smoke stinging, you're gasping for hope. The path a gauntlet, the plague's fixes a weight you can't shed, like the wound's rot. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just a failure, it's a tragedy, making medicine worse than the disease by killing the desperate, driven by error and panic. You're thinking of those plague posies, masking death, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that burned its sick for salvation's sake. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this plague or fade, and the thousands who've died here before, their lives lost in the smoke. The dawn nears, the village fades, and you're carrying this deadly despair, ready to delve into the superstition that trumped reason, a belief as cruel as the pyre's flame. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the posy so useless? Because it loved Edric's death more. You're stumbling on the path, the pyre blazing, as the village's gloom thickens, with the plague's failed fixes heavy in your heart. You're ready to explore the superstition that shaped medicine, a myth that doomed the sick. You're shivering in the damp chill of the village square, the air thick with the acrid smoke of a smoldering bonfire, and the faint tang of crushed lavender from a plague posy clutched by a nearby mourner. Moonlight bathes the cobblestones, casting eerie shadows on a crowd gathered around a chanting monk, his cross raised against the Black Death specter. You're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century, your fever burning hotter, the surgical wound on your leg oozing beneath a ragged bandage. The plague's failed fixes from last time, leeches, bruise, incense still weakening you. The villages, scorn and the manor's chains are a distant ache, but this square pulses with fear, where medicine leans on charms and curses over reason. You're here to delve into the superstition that trumped reason in medieval medicine, the mystical beliefs that made treatments worse than the disease, a folly as cruel as the feudal lash we felt in other tales. This is the haze of myth, and you're feeling its grip, sharp as the monk's fervent cry, heavy as the dread weighing the crowd. The mainstream fact is that medieval medicine was deeply influenced by superstition, with many treatments from the 11th to 15th centuries relying on magical or religious rituals, as documented in medical manuscripts and church records like the Liber Pontificalis 13th century. Healers and priests believed diseases like the plague were caused by demons, sin, or celestial omens, prescribing charms, prayers, or exorcisms alongside herbs and bleeding, often worsening outcomes by delaying practical care. You're swaying in the crowd, a woman beside you muttering a spell to banish your fever. And you're uneasy, her charming knotted cord feeling as useless as the plague posies we clutched last time. The bloodlettings drain, and the surgery's butchery we endured now joined by this mystical nonsense. The humoral theory's dogma a stage for superstition, as futile as the Victorian quack charms we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some healers used toad cures. Dried toads hung around your neck or crushed into potions, believed to draw out disease through magical sympathy. In the 13th century, apothecary ledgers note these, sold as plague wards. You're picturing a leathery toad dangling from the monk's belt, its shriveled form swaying and grinning. It's like a medieval fidget spinner, weirder than those bleeding bowls we winced at. You're half tempted to laugh, hoping it's less deadly than the herbal brew we sipped. But the crowd's fervent prayers and the curds not tighten your dread. The superstitions hold as firm as the Lord's token we wore, a belief no toad can break. Historians still argue whether superstition dominated medicine due to widespread fear or the Church's influence over knowledge, with no clear cause in chronicles or healer accounts. Some, citing plague panic, say it was a desperate response to uncontrollable diseases. Others, noting religious texts, argue the Church encouraged mystical cures to maintain spiritual authority, stifling reason like its feudal grip. We'll see. You're clutching your cloak, the monks chant about since plague piercing, and wondering if this magic's born of terror or the priest's power. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we face now. A fever these charms can't touch. The wedding night's dread we felt a softer fear than this supernatural haze. Your life a wager on their spells. Time for a quick joke. Why was the toad cure so croaky? Because it sang Edric's doom louder. You're chuckling, but its hush the crowd's murmur drowns it, and you're wary of a child's fearful glance. You're swaying, the square's chill seeping in, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene. The square's a fevered stage, with a bonfire spitting sparks, villagers clutching cords and crosses, and the monk's shadow looming, a far cry from the healer's smoky den or the manor's fields. You're not in the stable's muck or the chapel's pews. You're in a realm of superstition, where mystical beliefs rule. The monk's waving relics saints' bones. He claims to cast out plague demons, while others burn rue or wear toad pouches we mocked, believing they'll purify sin. But the plague's boils spread, the humoral theory's lies. We explored turning the sick into ritual fodder, the feudal system's yoke now a magical curse, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The superstitions aren't just feudal, they're deadly, diverting care when rest might save. The laudanum-like herbs will meet a cruel hope as this chant promises salvation. Though you stand, Edric's grit your core. Step closer to the bonfire and notice the details. The warm crackle of flames, the faint rustle of knotted cords, the way the posies' petals crumble, a sign of its lie. This square's a crucible, like those task chants we hummed for serfs, but it's bewitched. A place where your fever's a demon, not a disease. You're thinking of that herbal brew, how it poisoned you, and how these charms, relics, spells, toads mirror the surgery's butchery we faced, each ritual a chain to a false hope. You're wondering why your sickness is a sin, why the monk trusts bones over broth. The myths of divine lords we heard a cruel kin to this sorcery, strong but deadly. You're craving reason, but the fire's roar and the crowd's prayers are your reality. The system a trap, like the Victorian healer's myths we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the relic so holy? Because it fooled Edric's hope more. Then his fever. You're smiling, but it's grim. The woman's spell pulls you back, her faith a warning. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the chapel's shame, the loft's spark, the bloodletting's drain, the bruise, poison, the surgery's cut. They've led here, where superstition's the patient's doom. Not just a cure, but a life cursed, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those cruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved. Small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other victims, peasants, monks, their fevers like yours, each charm a shared wound. Their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife. Now buried by this mystical despair, as you edge from the fire, the monk's chant fading, you're gasping for truth. The squares smoke a haze. The superstitions weight a chain you can't shed, like the wounds rot. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just belief, it's a tragedy. Making medicine worse than the disease by chasing demons over facts, driven by fear and faith. You're thinking of those toad cures, promising magic, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that prayed its sick to death. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this myth or fade. And the thousands who've stood here before, their lives lost in the flames. The moonlight dims, the square empties, and you're carrying this mystical folly, ready to explore the church's stranglehold on healing. A dogma as cruel as the bonfire's glow. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the spell so loud? Because it loved Edric's death more. You're limping from the square. The posy dropped, as the village's gloom thickens, with superstition's folly heavy in your heart. You're ready to probe the church's role in medicine, a sanctity that doomed the sick. You're kneeling in the shadowed nave of the village church, the air heavy with the scent of melting wax, and the faint must of old stone, as candlelight flickers across a carved wooden altar. The cold floor bites through your patched cloak, and you're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century, your fever raging, the surgical wound on your leg throbbing beneath its bandage, the village square's superstitious chants still echoing in your ears, the plague's deadly fixes, posies, relics, spells from last time have left you weaker. But now you're seeking salvation, the priest's voice droning about divine healing as he sprinkles holy water. The manor's chains and the healer's den are distant, but this church holds sway, where medicine bends to faith's iron rule. You're here to explore the church's stranglehold on medieval medicine, how its religious dogma stifled progress and worsened diseases, a sanctity as cruel as the feudal lash we felt in other tales. This is the yoke of divine cure, and you're feeling its weight. Heavy as the crucifix above, sharp as the priest's judgmental gaze. The mainstream fact is that the medieval church exerted significant control over medicine from the 11th to 15th centuries, viewing illness as divine punishment or demonic influence, as documented in ecclesiastical texts like the Decretum of Gratian circa 1140. Priests and monks, often the era's healers, prioritized prayer, relics, and exorcisms over empirical treatments, restricting anatomical studies and branding new ideas as heresy, slowing medical advancement. You're clutching a rosary, the priest urging penance for your sinful fever, and you're uneasy. His holy water as useless as the plague posies we mocked last time, the bloodlettings drain, the toxic brew, and the surgery's butchery. We endured, now joined by this sacred futility, the humoral theory's dogma we unraveled upon to the church's rule, as stifling as the Victorian religious guilt we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some churches offered healing tokens. Small pewter medallions stamped with saints, given to the sick to invoke divine cure, believed to banish disease. In the 13th century, parish records note these. Handed out during masses. You're fingering one in your pocket. Its image of Saint Rock gleaming and grinning, it's like a medieval get-well card. Holier than those toad cures we chuckled at in the square. You're half tempted to pray to it, hoping for a miracle. But the priest's sermon on God's will and the rosary's weight keep you grounded. The church's grip as firm as the punishment tallies we faced in the stable. A sanctity no token can sway. Historians still argue whether the church's control over medicine was driven by a sincere belief in spiritual healing or a calculated bid to maintain power. With no clear motive in monastic records or medical treatises. Some, citing theological texts, say it reflected genuine faith in divine intervention. Others, noting bans on dissection, argue it was a power play to suppress secular knowledge. Like the feudal lord's dominance we saw. You're bowing your head. The priests chant about purging sin-piercing, and wondering if he's saving your soul, or guarding his authority. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we face now a fever. This dogma can't cure the wedding night's guilt we felt a softer burden than this sacred trap. Your life a wager on his prayers, time for a quick joke. Why was the healing token so shiny? Because it polished Edric's doom with faith. You're chuckling, but it's hushed, the creak of a pew drowns it. And you're wary of a nun's stern glance. You're shifting, the rosary slipping. As you take in the scene, you picture the scene. The church is a solemn fortress, with stone arches, pews of worn oak, and a reliquary glinting with saintly bones. A far cry from the village square's bonfire, or the healer's smoky den. You're not in the stable's muck or the field's furrows. You're in a realm of divine rule, where the church's dogma reigns. The priests sprinkling water, chanting for cleansing, claiming your fever's a sin, while monks offer relic kisses or token prayers we mocked, believing they'll heal the plague. But graves multiply, the humoral theories lies. We explored turning the sick into penitents. The feudal systems yoke now a sacred curse. Like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The church's cures aren't just feudal. They're deadly, delaying care for soul's sake. The laudanum-like herbs will meet a cruel hope as this prayer promises heaven. Though you kneel, Edric's grit your core, step closer to the altar, and notice the details. The cool wax under your fingers, the faint hum of the priest's Latin, the way the token's metal warms in your hand, a false hope. This nave's a refuge, like those tasked chants we hummed for serfs. But it's oppressive. A courtroom where your fever's a sin, not a sickness. You're thinking of that plague posy, how it failed you, and how these tokens, relics, prayers, water mirror the surgery's butchery we faced, each ritual a chain to a false hope. You're wondering why your illness is God's wrath, why the priest trusts faith over facts. The myths of divine lords we heard a cruel kin to this theology, strong but deadly. You're craving healing, but the altar's cold, the system, a trap, like the Victorian healer's myths we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the relic so proud? Because it fooled Edric's hope more than his fever. You're smiling, but it's grim, the nun's cough pulls you back, her piety a warning. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the square's spells, the bloodletting's drain, the bruise poison, the surgeries. Cut they've led here, where the church's dogma is the patient's doom. Not just a cure but a life judged, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those cruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other patients, peasants, monks, their fevers like yours. Each prayer a shared wound, their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife. Now buried by this sacred lie, as you rise from your knees, the priest's chant fading, you're gasping for reason. The church's stone a cage. The church's stranglehold a weight you can't shed. Like the wounds rot, you're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just faith, it's a barrier, making medicine worse than the disease by chaining it to dogma, driven by power and piety. You're thinking of those healing tokens, promising miracles, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that prayed its sick to death. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this dogma or fade, and the thousands who've knelt here before, their lives lost in the wax. The candle dims, the nave empties, and you're carrying this sacred folly, ready to discover why patients trusted these deadly treatments, a desperation as cruel as the priest's cross. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the prayer so loud? Because it loved Edric's death more. You're slipping from the pew, the token left behind, as the church's hush deepens. With the church's stranglehold heavy in your heart, you're ready to explore the patient's desperate trust, a faith that doomed the sick. You're slumped against the rough wall of a village hovel, the air stale with the scent of damp straw, and the faint metallic tang of sweat-soaked bandages. Wrapped around your festering leg wound, a single tallow candle sputters, casting a feeble glow, and you're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century. Your fever spiking as the Black Death's shadow looms. The church's hollow prayers from the last time echoing in your weary mind. The village square's chants, the healer's poisons, and the surgical blade's sting are a blur. But you're clinging to a frayed hope. Clutching a vial of murky plague tonic a wandering peddler swore would save you. The manor's chains and the healer's den feel worlds away. But this hovel is your last stand, where desperation drives you to trust deadly cures. You're here to discover why medieval patients trusted these lethal treatments. The desperation that fueled their faith in medicine worse than the disease. A clinging hope as raw as the futile lash we've felt in other tales. This is the pulse of despair, and you're feeling its beat. Heavy as the vial in your trembling hand. Sharp as the fever's claw in your chest. The mainstream fact is that medieval patients, facing rampant disease and high mortality from the 11th to 15th centuries, often trusted healers' treatments due to a lack of alternatives and a culture of deference to authority, as noted in chronicles and medical accounts like those of Guy de Chauliac, 14th century. With no understanding of germs or scientific medicine, you turned to priests, apothecaries, or barbers, believing their bloodletting, herbs, or prayers could save you. Driven by fear and faith despite frequent failures. You're staring at the tonic, its oily sheen glinting, and you're torn. Knowing the healer's brew we sipped and the surgery's cut we endured made you worse. Yet you're desperate. The church's dogma we knelt under, and the plagues. Failed fixes we faced leaving you no choice. The humoral theories lies a lifeline. As fragile as the Victorian patient's trust in laudanum we met. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some patients carried plague pebbles, smooth stones inscribed with crosses, believed to absorb disease if rubbed on boils or held during prayer. In the 13th century, market records show these, peddled as miracle cures. You're fingering one in your pocket, its weight a faint comfort, and grinning it's like a medieval stress ball, humbler than those healing tokens we clutched in the church. You're half tempted to rub it, praying it'll ease your fever. But the tonic's bitter smell and your wound's throb keep you focused. The patient's trust as desperate as the toad cures. We mocked in the square, a hope no stone can hold. Historians still argue whether this trust stemmed from genuine belief in healers' expertise, or a psychological need to act against despair, with no clear cause in patient accounts or ecclesiastical records. Some, citing religious culture, say you trusted because faith in divine or magical cures was universal. Others, noting social pressures, argue deference to authority priests, lords. Healers compelled you to obey, like the feudal bonds we plowed through. You're tilting the vial, the peddler's promise, life in every drop, ringing, and wondering if you believe it or just need to. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we faced now a fever this tonic might kill. The wedding night's dread we felt a softer fear than this blind hope. Your life a wager on a stranger's brew. Time for a quick joke. Why was the plague pebble so smooth? Because it rolled past Edric's common sense. You're chuckling, but it's faint the candle's flicker drowns it. And you're wary of a neighbor's cough outside. You're raising the vial, the hovel's gloom pressing. As you take in the scene, you picture the scene. The hovel's a cramped tomb with a sagging straw bed, a cracked jug, and walls patched with mud. A far cry from the church's stone nave or the village square's bonfire. You're not in the stable's muck or the healer's den. You're in a space of desperation, where trust in deadly cures is all you have. The tonic's your lifeline, like the relics or posies we scorned, peddled as a plague bane to cleanse your humors. But you're doubtful, the bloodlettings drain, the bruise poison, and the surgery's cut we endured proving healers' lies. The church's dogma we knelt under a sacred trap, like the ignorance that bound souls in other tales. The trust isn't just faith, it's survival, a grasp at hope when death knocks. The laudanum-like herbs will meet a cruel echo as this tonic tempts, though you sip. Edric's grit your core, step closer to the bed and notice the details. The coarse straw under your fingers, the faint creak of the hovel's beams. The way the pebble's cross catches the light, a false savior. This hovel's a cell, like those task chants we hummed for serfs. But it's hopeless. A place where your fever's a plea for miracles. You're thinking of that healing token, how it failed you, and how this tonic muddy, bitter mirrors the plague's fixes we faced, each sip a chain to a false hope. You're wondering why you trust this peddler, why fear makes you drink. The myths of divine lords we heard a cruel kin to this desperation, strong but deadly. You're craving life, but the vial's emptying, the system a death trap, like the Victorian healer's poisons we met. Here's another chuckle. Why was the tonic so murky? Because it hid Edric's death. In every drop, you're smiling, but it's grim the neighbor's wail pulls you back. Her grief a warning. You're also connecting the dots. The hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the square's spells, the church's dogma, the bloodletting's drain, the bruise poison, the surgery's cut they've led here, where trust's the patient's doom. Not just a cure but a life gambled, like the wedding night's surrender we faced. You're remembering those gruel tricks, a spark of defiance for serfs, and how they align with the rebel marks we carved, small fights in a crushing world. You're thinking of other patients' peasants, monks their fevers like yours, each vial a shared wound, their pain a mirror to the struggle we've carried since the healer's first knife. Now deepened by this desperate faith as you drain the vial, the peddler's promise fading. You're gasping for strength, the hovels, straw a trap, the trust's weight a chain you can't shed, like the wound's rot. You're starting to see the bigger picture. This isn't just trust, it's a tragedy. making medicine worse than the disease by fueling false hopes. Driven by fear and faith, you're thinking of those plague pebbles, promising life, like the laudanum-like herbs that dulled other struggles, and how they reflect a society that clung to death's cures. You're wondering about the patient you'll be, if you'll outlast this faith or fade, and the thousands who've sipped here before, their lives lost in the straw. The candle dims, the hovel fades, and you're carrying this desperate truth, ready to reflect on the legacy of medical misery, a mark as cruel as the fever's grip. One last joke to ease us forward. Why was the trust so blind? Because it loved Edric's death more. You're collapsing on the straw, the vial empty, as the hovel's gloom thickens. With desperate trust heavy in your heart, you're ready to explore the legacy of medieval medicine, a misery that shaped a world. You're curled up on the straw pallet in the village hovel, the air thin with the fading scent of burnt straw and the lingering bitterness of that plague tonic. Now an empty vial rolling on the dirt floor. A sliver of dawn seeps through a cracked shutter, casting a pale glow. And you're Edric, a blacksmith in the 13th century. Your fever a smoldering ember, the surgical wound on your leg festering. The desperate trust in deadly cures we clung to last time now a hollow ache. The village square's chants and the church's dogma are distant murmurs. But your body bears the scars of medieval medicine's failures, bloodletting, poisons, surgery, superstition. You're here to reflect on the legacy of this medical misery, how it shaped medieval society and echoed into the future. A mark as enduring as the manners chains we felt in other tales. This is the shadow of suffering, and you're feeling its weight, soft as the dawn's light, heavy as the lives lost to a healer's knife. The mainstream fact is that medieval medicine's failures, from the 11th to 15th centuries, left a lasting impact on European society, exposing the limits of humoral theory and superstition, as seen in chronicles and early medical reforms like the founding of universities in Bologna 1088 and Paris 1150. Your pain leeches, bruise, cuts, prayers we endured revealed medicine's futility, sparking slow shifts toward observation-based healing by the Renaissance, influencing laws on healer training and public health, a ripple from the din's horrors to the plague's despair. You're tracing the vial's rim, its emptiness a symbol, and you're seeing your struggle, from the healer's lancet to the church's relics, as a thread in this change. The trust we placed a seed for a world where medicine might heal, unlike the Victorian quackery's legacy we explored. But here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval medicine's failures inspired memento mori amulets, skull-shaped charms worn to remind you of death's nearness, often sold after plague waves. In the 14th century, market records note these, etched with mottos like "Remember thy end." You're fingering a wooden one in your pocket, its carving worn, and grinning. It's like a medieval motivational poster, grimmer than those plague pebbles we clutched in the hovel. You're half tempted to keep it as a badge of survival, but the wounds throb and the fever's haze pull you back. The legacy's weight deeper than the tonic's dregs, a mark no charm can soften. Historians still argue whether medieval medicine's legacy drove significant progress or merely highlighted failures without immediate change. With no clear verdict in medical histories or university charters, some, citing Renaissance anatomy, say it forced a reckoning, birthing modern medicine. Others, noting centuries of stagnation, argue its impact was delayed, overshadowed by plagues and wars. Like the church's grip we saw, you're staring at the dawn, the straw prickling, and wondering if you're suffering from the bloodlettings drained to the square's spells mattered, or if it's a whisper in time. The field's toil, the undercroft's hunger, and the village's scorn we faced. Now a fever that changed little. The wedding night's pain we felt a softer scar than this medical ruin. Your life a flicker in history's tale, time for a quick joke. Why was the memento mori so gloomy? Because it knew Edric's cure was worse. You're chuckling, but its soft a bird's chirp outside drowns it, and you're wary of a neighbor's footstep. You're sinking deeper into the straw, the cloak slipping, as you take in the scene. Picture the scene, the hovels of fragile shelter, with sagging beams, a cold hearth, and the dawn's light tracing cracks in the wall, a far cry from the church's stone nave or the village square's pyre. You're not in the healer's smoky den or the manor's fields. You're in a space of reflection, where medical misery's legacy looms. Your ordeal leeches we bled, bruise we sipped, cuts we survived. Prayers we whispered wasn't just pain, it was a force, shaping tales, laws, and minds, from Boccaccio's plague stories to university dissections. The plague's fixes we despaired a spark for change. Like the sisterhood's courage in other tales, you're feeling the ripple, how your suffering, tied to the church's dogma and the healer's knife, nudged society to seek truth over myth, a shift as slow as the dawn's glow. Step closer to the shutter and notice the details. The cool wood under your fingers, the faint cluck of hens outside, the way the amulet's skull gleams, a reminder of your fight. This hovel's a bridge, like those task chants we hummed for serfs. But it's timeless, weaving your pain into history's cloth. You're thinking of that toxic brew, how it poisoned you, and how its failure fueled questions that birthed better care, or the church's tokens, a lie that sparked skepticism, the feudal chains we plowed through breaking link by link. You're wondering about other patients' peasants, knights their fevers like yours, their stories fueling a world where medicine might save, not slay, a legacy from the Dun's knife to tomorrow's hope. Here's another chuckle. Why was the legacy so grim? Because it grew from Edric's scars. You're smiling, but it's tender. The dawn's warmth feels like promise, a new day's hope. You're also connecting the hall's feasts, the feudal chains, the yard's toil, the stable's lash, the undercroft's hunger, the village's scorn, the square's spells, the church's dogma, the bloodletting's drain, the bruise poison, the surgery's cut, the trust's despair. They've led here, where medical misery left a mark, from tales to reforms, a legacy of pain turned to progress. You're remembering those laudanum like herbs, numbing other struggles, and how your fight outshone them, a spark that echoes in safer cures. You're thinking of those who followed, their illnesses less doomed, their lives built on your scars. Each pain a seed for change. Now, let's let the world soften, the edges fading like a gentle breath. You're still in that hovel, the dawn's golden light wrapping you in a quiet embrace, the vial's bitter dregs, and the wound's ache dissolving into the straw's hush. The healer's knife, the church's chants, and the plague's shadow drift away, leaving a warm ember of your endurance, Edric's grit glowing soft. You've walked through dens and squares, carried fevers, cuts, and prayers, and that's enough. Picture a quiet meadow, its grasses swaying under morning's glow, where your struggle, the patient's hopes, and countless lives' resilience drift like petals on a breeze. The knives, the bruise, the fears, they're gone, leaving only peace. A world cradling you close. Let the dawn deepen. Let the silence hold you. Your heart's full, your eyes heavy, and the morning's ready to weave you into its dreams. Sleep now, sweet listener, and rest in the glow of stories that endure, soft as the sunrise ahead.